You probably won't hear this at your regular doctor's office, but I'll be honest. If you stopped masturbating as an adult, your body may already be undergoing major changes you're not even aware of. This isn't some taboo or pointless conversation, but a real clinical physiological reality. Ignoring this fact can have serious consequences not only for your sex life, but also for your brain, heart, sleep quality, immunity, and even your sense of self. My name is Mohit Kara, a urologist and men's health specialist with over 3 decades of experience treating older patients across the country. Throughout my career, I have studied how the body changes as we age, particularly in the areas of intimacy, hormones, and long-term energy. One of the biggest unseen threats I have seen is that too many older men are giving up on their sexual health, and with it, they are losing a critical aspect of their overall well-being. What may come as a surprise is that masturbation isn't just a vestige of youthful desires. It remains one of the most effective ways your body retains as you age to regulate hormones, improve brain function, protect your prostate, and even fight depression. If you've stopped or never started, the price you pay may be much higher than you think. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you exactly what's going on inside your body. Your body, when you give up masturbation in old age, and what I'm about to tell you, can radically change your perception of health and your attitude towards yourself. Before we begin, if it is important to you to stay cheerful, healthy, and independent as you age, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on useful tips created just for you. If this topic is close to you, write a 1 in the comments. If not, 0. Your feedback helps me create content that truly supports your health and well-being. Now let's move on to the first and perhaps most underestimated problem that arises when you give up masturbation in old age. This is how it imperceptibly affects the health of the prostate gland and urinary system. The first consequence is decreased prostate health and bladder function. When I began practicing urology more than 30 years ago, I never imagined that so many patients would open up about such an intimate and important issue. Many simply stopped having sex in their later years. I remember one man who, at 74, was in excellent shape and mentally alert, but was waking up 4 or 5 times a night to go to the toilet and couldn't figure out why. He said to me, "Doctor, I've decided I don't need this part of my life anymore." What he and most men don't realize is that regular ejaculation, including through masturbation, plays a key role in maintaining normal prostate function. The prostate gland is not just a passive organ located in the body, but a living and active mechanism. It produces fluid, can expand and contract, and, like any system, suffers without regular stimulation and release. If the fluid is not released regularly, the product of its work can stagnate in the gland. This stagnation creates favorable conditions for inflammation, swelling, and over time leads to increased pressure that interferes with urination and impairs sexual function. You may feel this as a feeling of heaviness in the bladder, a weakened flow, or an uncomfortable feeling of fullness that does not go away. These symptoms should not be considered minor troubles. They are the first alarm signals. And the most dangerous thing is that chronic congestion can imperceptibly develop into serious diseases. For example, benign prostatic hyperplasia, known as BPH, which affects almost half of men over 60 years of age. If left untreated, it can lead to urinary retention, bladder infections, and even the need for catheterization. The man in question eventually had to have surgery to lower his blood pressure, which he might have avoided with simple, consistent treatment. Regular ejaculation helps cleanse the prostate gland, flush out old fluid, and reduce the risk of buildup. Studies have shown that men who ejaculate at least 21 times a month are significantly less likely to develop prostate cancer than those who do not. And I want to emphasize that this is not about returning to youth or obsessive behavior. This is a question of functionality and health. using your biological capabilities to protect your body in the simplest and most natural way. When a person stops masturbating in adulthood, he not only gives up pleasure, he exposes himself to the risk of pain, inflammation, and a gradual loss of control over one of the most basic functions of the body, urination. I have had patients who became afraid to leave the house because they did not trust their bladder. I have seen strong and proud men who suffered from insomnia and anxiety during the day due to a condition that could be controlled or even prevented with regular stimulation. Of course, it is a psychological burden to lose control over your own body, constantly plan trips to the toilet, be afraid of long car rides, wake up every 2 hours at night. This undermines the feeling of independence because it is not only about the prostate, but about human freedom. And here's what's surprising, because the problem that starts in the prostate is not limited to it. The next stage affects not just the physical condition, but also the functioning of the brain. This process can change thinking, emotions, and memory, sometimes so seriously that it becomes very difficult to eliminate the consequences. Let's take a closer look at how the lack of regular stimulation affects mental clarity and cognitive functions. If you are interested and agree with these findings, write the number 1 in the comments. This way I will know that you are with me. You are attentive and truly appreciate this information. And now let's move on to the second important point. 2. Brain fog and decreased mental clarity. A patient in his late 70s recently came to see me. He wasn't worried about his prostate or his energy levels. He simply said something that struck me. "Doctor, I don't feel like myself anymore. I walk into a room and forget why I was there, and I lose the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. I used to be so focused. Is this just the effects of aging?" This question is asked more often than you might think. It's true that there are natural changes in cognitive function as we age, but few people, even educated and health-conscious people, know that sexual activity, including masturbation, plays an important role in maintaining brain function. Here's what happens when you masturbate. Your brain releases a mix of neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, that are directly linked to memory, concentration, and emotional balance. These chemicals not only provide immediate pleasure, but also help form and maintain neural connections, stimulate blood flow in the brain, and reduce levels of cortisol, the stress hormone that destroys nerve cells in large quantities. When a person stops masturbating for a long time, the frequency of these natural chemical surges decreases. This gradually dulls your mental abilities. Concentration becomes more difficult, information processing slows down, and motivation decreases. Everything happens gradually. First, names are forgotten. Then other memory lapses occur. When a certain day comes, a person begins to completely doubt his own mind. And in this doubt, something more dangerous can creep in: fear. I have seen patients become panicky and depressed simply because they thought there was something wrong with them, when in fact their brains were suffering from a lack of stimulation and chemical balance. In men, hormonal imbalances are added to this. Testosterone, a hormone closely linked to memory, determination, and activity, begins to decline faster if sexual activity tends to be almost zero. Testosterone does not only mean sexual desire, it affects self-perception, strength, clarity of thought. Frequent and healthy release helps maintain testosterone levels as you age. Some studies even link a decline in sexual activity in the elderly to early signs of cognitive decline, including dementia. I'm not saying that not masturbating leads to Alzheimer's, but if the brain is deprived of stimulation, emotional relaxation, and hormonal support, it becomes more vulnerable, losing its internal harmony and stability. For many, the fog becomes so thick that it changes their lives, their attitudes toward others, and their own selves. One man said he stopped going to a chess club because he couldn't concentrate on the game, while another retired teacher said he woke up every morning feeling empty. These were not cases of memory loss requiring medication, but symptoms of a life cut off from physical intimacy. And here's the sad thing. Many problems can be prevented. You don't need expensive drugs or complicated procedures for this. Sometimes it's enough to simply connect with your body, to give it the quiet care it constantly asks for. After all, when you activate your body, you awaken your brain. However, losing clarity of thought is only part of the story. A more subtle and dangerous manifestation begins when the emotional balance is disturbed, and the mood sharply worsens for no apparent reason. This may be unnoticeable to others, but it causes deep harm and is difficult to discuss. Let's figure out how the rejection of close contact with yourself can gradually lead to depression. 3 things are important to highlight: increased sadness, a feeling of inner emptiness, and emotional detachment. I remember one patient, a man a little over 70 years old, a widower who had retired and was in fairly good health. He came to me not because of physical pain, but because of something that was hard to describe in words. He looked into my eyes and said, "I don't feel anything anymore. No sadness, no joy, just emptiness." Then he added, "Is this normal at my age?" This question constantly rings in my head because many people ask it in different ways. Often people assume that a dulling of the senses and a gradual withdrawal from emotions is a natural part of aging. In fact, there may be a deeper physiological reason behind it that is not usually talked about: a loss of sexual stimulation, especially self-satisfaction. The truth is that when a person stops paying attention to his body and refuses intimate physical contact with himself, his emotional world begins to change. It happens quietly, but significantly. Masturbation is not something shameful or useless. It's not just a physical act, it's also an emotional release, a built-in stress relief system in the body. During orgasm, the brain releases powerful chemicals like oxytocin and endorphins, natural mood stabilizers that combat anxiety, stress, and low spirits. If you take away this outlet from your life, especially during times of stress, loneliness, or grief, you risk emotional numbness, which over time can develop into something more serious: depression. I have seen this happen gradually. A person stops masturbating after the loss of a loved one, or because they feel it is inappropriate for their age. Weeks turn into months. He becomes quieter, withdraws into himself, loses interest in hobbies and even in communication. His sleep patterns and appetite change. Life begins to seem gray and dull. The most offensive thing is that most people do not realize the connection between what is happening and the cessation of contact with their own bodies. They often blame themselves or believe that this is their fate now. But in reality, they are simply missing this important, albeit subtle, way to maintain emotional balance. In older people, depression often goes unnoticed because it does not always manifest as sadness. It can manifest as fatigue, irritability, withdrawal, or lack of motivation and desire. While medication and psychotherapy have their place, I have helped patients many times simply by encouraging them to reconnect with their bodies and regain physical intimacy with themselves. One man told me that he felt alive again after he started touching himself again, and doing so regularly for the first time in years. He said that not only did it improve his mood, but it reminded him that he was still a person, not just a body waiting to die. This small act gave him back a part of himself that he thought was lost forever. Here's what I want you to understand. Masturbation in adulthood is not about fantasy, desire, or shame. It's a way to maintain emotional health, to give your body the space to feel, to release emotions, and to remember what it means to be real. When the connection with one's own feelings is lost, a person risks facing not just sadness, but alienation, emotional atrophy, and in some cases, the disappearance of the desire to live a full life. But the consequences of an emotional breakup aren't the only troubles. As the nights get longer and sleep becomes less restorative, another subtle threat emerges that can affect memory, immunity, and increase the risk of serious illness. Let's now discuss how a lack of sexual satisfaction can deprive your body of the deep, healing sleep it needs. If you're still with me and find these thoughts helpful, drop a number 1 in the comments to let me know you're here and following along. Now let's move on to the 4th point: worsening sleep quality. I recall a man in his 60s who came to me after months of excruciatingly poor sleep. He looked exhausted, pale, and clearly irritated. The doctor said I would fall asleep, but wake up at 2 a.m. like I'd been shot out of a cannon and just lie there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the morning. We ran tests, and the results were normal. No apnea or serious warning signs. But when I asked him about his sex life, he turned away and muttered that that part of his life was over. But that part, which he thought was gone forever, might be the key to what his body really needed: full, uninterrupted sleep. Sleep isn't just eyes closed and stillness. It's a complex hormonal process. One of the most effective natural ways to induce deep sleep remains something that most people forget about with age. During orgasm, the body releases oxytocin, prolactin, endorphins, the perfect chemical cocktail created by nature to switch the nervous system from tension to relaxation. At the same time, the level of cortisol, the hormone responsible for anxiety and wakefulness, drops sharply. Breathing slows down, the heart rate stabilizes, muscles relax. The optimal state for deep sleep sets in. Now imagine that this process is not in your life at all, not just once, but for weeks, months, and even years in a row. This is what happens when older people stop masturbating. The body loses the natural tool it used to rely on. Most often, anxiety, irritation, insomnia, and constant tossing and turning in bed occur instead. Some try to cope with sleeping pills, while others simply accept constant fatigue as an inevitable condition. But the consequences of poor sleep can be much more serious. Lack of sleep affects the body in ways that go deeper than just making you feel tired. Chronic sleep deprivation weakens the immune system, accelerates cognitive decline, increases the risk of heart disease, and makes you more vulnerable to anxiety and depression. In older people, it often leads to falls, memory problems, and loss of independence. I've seen patients who used to lead active lifestyles, but gradually became withdrawn, not because of a serious illness, but because of constant fatigue. And here's what's especially disturbing. Many didn't even realize that they were missing something simple that once helped them sleep well. It's not a medicine or a supplement, but the body's natural mechanism for relieving stress. Masturbation may seem like a small or even unimportant activity, but for some, it is the key to going from 4 hours of fitful sleep to 7 hours of deep, restorative rest. One of my patients shared after resuming the practice, "I sleep like I did 30 years ago. I didn't even know I needed this release so much. I thought I was just getting old." And herein lies the big problem. Many people confuse signs of neglect with age-related changes and suffer in silence. If you can't sleep, your thoughts won't stop, your muscles tense, and the hours seem endless. Think about the last time your body truly relaxed and let go. Sometimes the answer isn't a new medicine or a breathing app, but reconnecting with a long-forgotten but familiar rhythm in your body if you allow it to respond. Losing sleep may subtly sap your energy and mental clarity, but the next effect is much more noticeable in your body. It manifests itself in weakened muscles, poor balance, and problems with bladder control. Let's look at what happens to your pelvic floor muscles and circulation when sex ends. 5. Weakened pelvic floor muscles and blood flow. Several years ago, I consulted with a former firefighter in his late 70s, a man of strong build who had prided himself on his strength all his life. He came to me complaining of mild urinary incontinence and difficulty standing for long periods of time. due to discomfort in his lower back and hips. "It's strange," he said. "I feel like the foundation of my body is gradually weakening." What he was describing was not just age, but a slow, subtle loss of tone in his pelvic floor muscles, and he was not alone. The pelvic floor muscles are located at the base of the body and support the bladder, bowels, and genitals. Most people don't think about these muscles until they have problems, whether it's incontinence, constipation, erectile dysfunction, or discomfort when walking or standing. But an important aspect is often overlooked. Regular sexual stimulation, including masturbation, plays a key role in keeping these muscles toned and active. During arousal and orgasm, the pelvic floor muscles contract rhythmically. This is a kind of training, necessary not for appearance, but for the proper functioning of the body. Improving blood circulation in the lower body strengthens the internal support system and promotes normal nerve and muscle function. This is not a question of efficiency, but of health. When you stop masturbating regularly, these muscles do not simply go silent, they begin to atrophy. Blood flow slows, tissues lose elasticity, nerve responses weaken, and over time, unexpected problems may arise. Frequent urge to urinate, slight leakage after going to the toilet, difficulty holding in gas, or even painful sensations when moving. For men, this can mean a dramatic decline in sexual function, and for women, dryness, tension, and discomfort that discourage intimacy. I have personally seen independent adults avoid social events simply because they don't trust their bladder. Others experience embarrassment when they suddenly leak when they cough or sneeze, not realizing that it's all due to years of neglect. The circulation and muscle activity of the pelvic area are of utmost importance, and I have to say it straight out. Ignoring this area isn't just inconvenient, it can lead to falls, incontinence, and a loss of dignity that no one deserves. You may begin to depend on special pads, special underwear, or plan your life around the location of the toilet simply because the base of your body is not getting the stimulation and support it needs. The longer this condition lasts, the more difficult it is to reverse. It saddens me how many people have to deal with this because they don't pay attention to their own health. People often suffer in silence, do not discuss their problems, feel embarrassed, confused, or assume that this is a natural part of aging. But I want to emphasize that even at 70, 80, and beyond, the body wants to maintain its ability to function. One of the most effective natural ways to support yourself without resorting to drugs or special equipment is regular and safe, intimate stimulation. By re-establishing this connection, you not only awaken pleasure, but also restore strength, direct blood to where it is most needed, awaken nerves, keep tissues alive, and remind the lower body of its importance. While these physical effects are significant, the next point touches on the deep processes of immunity, cellular defenses, and the body's ability to resist disease. Because what happens in the bloodstream after orgasm may be one of the most important but underestimated health benefits. Let's discuss how a complete lack of sexual activity can be silently weakening your immune system. A few years back to Mohit Kara, one of his patients, a man in his late 60s who had always been in good health, came to him. But that season he looked exhausted and complained of frequent illnesses. For the third time that winter, he had been overcome by prolonged colds and minor infections. "I used to recover in a couple of days," the patient said, "but now even a small illness puts me out of action for weeks." After ruling out common causes, diet, sleep, medication, Mohit carefully asked about another important area of the patient's life. He smiled awkwardly and shook his head, admitting that he hadn't been sexually active in a long time, even alone. He said, "No, that part of me just hasn't worked for a long time." Many people don't realize that sexual activity, including masturbation, directly affects the immune system. This is not a figurative expression, but a scientific fact. During sexual arousal, and especially orgasm, the body releases a whole cocktail of biochemicals. It's not just dopamine and oxytocin, which cause pleasant sensations, but also real agents that strengthen the immune system. For example, immunoglobulin A, or IgA, increases significantly in the body. This antibody helps protect the body from viruses, bacteria, and infections, especially in the respiratory and digestive systems. At the same time, endorphins are produced, which reduce inflammation and promote tissue regeneration. Imagine being deprived of this immune boost for not just a week, but months or even years. Your body begins to lose one of its most basic and natural defenses at a time when immunity is already weakening. Taking away this mechanism is like removing the batteries from a smoke alarm. At first, it may go unnoticed, but when problems arise, the body is no longer able to respond as it once did. Mohit Kher has observed this in practice. Patients who have given up intimate life often get sick more often, take longer to recover, and experience exacerbations of chronic inflammation. At the same time, many do not associate the deterioration in their health with the lack of sexual activity. Although the body clearly sends warning signals about problems, the immune system is not only responsible for fighting colds, but also plays a vital role in preventing chronic diseases. It controls cancer, protects the heart, and promotes wound healing. Regular sexual pleasure helps maintain hormonal balance, reduce stress levels by reducing the hormone cortisol, and improve blood circulation. All of these factors are essential for strengthening the immune system. When sexual activity disappears, a chain reaction begins. Stress increases, sleep deteriorates, inflammation increases, and the body becomes less resilient and weaker than it was before. One woman in her late 70s who had lost her husband confided to Mohit Kher that she had not touched herself for nearly 5 years. When they had a frank discussion about the connection between intimacy and immune strength, she decided to try to reconnect with that side of her life, not for the sake of passion, but for the sake of her health. A few months later, she returned with brighter eyes and more energy. "I can't explain it," she said, "but I feel more alive, like my body is working with me instead of against me. It's not magic, but the result of the body receiving the signals it needs, signals that say, 'We're still here and we want to grow.'" Often the topic is ignored, embarrassed, or considered uncomfortable. But the immune system doesn't respond to shame. It responds to action. Sexual stimulation, even alone, is a powerful act that sends a signal of life and strength to every cell in the body. Even though a weakened immune system can make the body more vulnerable, neglecting your body can ultimately affect the most fundamental level of your sense of self. Because when you lose awareness of your body, you gradually lose your sense of who you really are. Let's look at how a lack of self-care silently erodes your sense of self-worth and what you can do to regain it. The loss of connection with the body and the feeling of self-importance is a moment I will never forget. One evening I had the opportunity to talk to a patient who was retired and already in his 70s. He had been a school principal, a confident and lively man who knew how to hold the attention of an audience. However, when he came for a routine medical checkup, I noticed a change. His shoulders had slumped a little. His gaze had grown dull. During the conversation, he said sadly, "It seems to me that I no longer live in my body, but only exist in it." His words sank deep into my soul because I had heard similar things more than once, from both men and women, albeit formulated differently, but with one essence. They no longer felt at home in their own bodies. And most often, it begins with silence, with a refusal to feel and be intimate with oneself, perceiving it either as unnecessary or as a relic of the past. But the truth is that the cessation of physical touch leads to a distancing from oneself, slow, barely noticeable, and sometimes irreversible. Touching yourself is not only about pleasure, it is about awareness, about the fact that even light touches help you maintain a connection with your body. Without any purpose other than to feel yourself, you remind your nervous system that you are still here, that you matter, that your body is still part of your identity, and not just a vessel that you will soon leave behind. When this does not happen, a kind of emotional and psychological distance develops. It becomes easier to ignore small aches, to look in the mirror less often, to believe that this stage of life is not worth caring about. This is perhaps the most dangerous loss of all, the loss of one's sense of self-worth. I have seen this disconnection lead to profound emotional numbness, shame about aging, withdrawal from physical intimacy, and even loss of motivation for basic self-care. People stop exercising, eating right, choosing their clothes with care. Why bother, they think, when their body no longer feels like their own? One woman told me she hadn't touched herself since menopause. I just didn't feel like a woman anymore, she said. The less she touched herself, the more she disappeared. That word disappear is so striking, because that's what happens to so many older people who stop connecting with their bodies. They lose not only pleasure, but also a sense of identity, a sense of self, a sense of aliveness. Now, the most important thing I want you to hear is that it doesn't have to be like that. Coming back to your body through self-touching is not about 20-something sexuality. It's an homage to the life that's still inside you. It's a way of saying, I'm still here, I still feel, I'm alive. You deserve to be seen, even by yourself. When you reconnect with your body, even in the privacy of your own home, you begin to slowly erase that emptiness inside. You remind yourself that aging is not an end, that your value did not end with your youth. You come back to yourself, and perhaps that is the most healing act of all. As we wrap up this journey, let's bring it all together, because each of the 7 consequences is serious on its own. But together, they tell a much more important and disturbing story. In this final message, I want to show you what's at stake and, most importantly, how you can take control today. Final thoughts on restoring intimacy and health. Looking back on my years caring for older patients, I am struck not so much by the medical challenges as by the quiet, invisible toll they take on them. Tolls that don't show up in tests or scans. The man who once felt confident now avoids looking in the mirror. The woman who once exuded joy and ease no longer feels her body. Most people tell them it's a natural part of aging, but I don't believe that for a second. If you followed me this far, I'm guessing you don't either. The truth is that the moment you stop caring about your sex life, the moment you neglect this part of your body and your being, a chain of subtle consequences begins. We've covered each one in detail. One important aspect is how the condition of the prostate gland and urinary system deteriorates when regular liberation is absent. The brain becomes clouded and loses its sharpness of perception due to lack of stimulation. The lack of physical intimacy can lead to depression, sleep disturbances, poor circulation, and even weakened immunity. And perhaps most painfully, how the refusal of personal, intimate contact with one's own body gradually destroys self-esteem, making you feel like a stranger to yourself. These factors are far from trivial. They are not just a type of age-related changes. They are a signal that the body, mind, and soul require attention. Я встречался с пациентами, которые чувствовали себя разбитыми, отрешенными и лишенными чувств. Но я видел в их глазах перемены, когда они начали возвращать себе эту часть жизни. Для этого не нужен кто-то другой, не требуется молодость или совершенное здоровье. Все, что нужно, это разрешение самому себе принять свою значимость и право на близость. Именно сейчас. Особенно сейчас. Понимаю, что многие избегают говорить на эту тему. Кто-то испытывает стыд. Кто-то просто не получал знаний, что можно и нужно заботиться о сексуальном здоровье в любом возрасте. Я хочу, чтобы вы услышали это от врача, который прошел эту дорогу вместе с тысячами мужчин и женщин. Это не просто допустимо. Это крайне необходимо. Мастурбация в пожилом возрасте – это не вопрос излишеств, а забота о циркуляции крови, ясности ума, гормональном балансе, эмоциональной устойчивости, защите иммунитета и сохранении своей идентичности. Это не роскошь, а базовая необходимость. Забота о себе – это своего рода заявление, что вы все еще живы в этом теле и несете ответственность за его благополучие. Один пациент как-то признался мне: «Я не осознавал, как сильно скучал по ощущению себя настоящим, пока снова не коснулся этой части своей души». Именно об этом речь. Не просто существовать, но ощущать жизнь всей глубиной. Не просто проживать годы, а наполнять их осознанностью, достоинством и радостью. Если вы забыли эту часть себя, спрятали ее или осудили, я приглашаю вас пересмотреть свое отношение, вновь наладить связь и вспомнить. Ваше тело все еще слушает. Оно все еще способно и достойно. Начните с малого, с любопытства и доброты. Но главное – начните. Выбирая заботу о себе, вы не только сохраняете здоровье, вы возвращаете себе жизнь. Если мое послание откликнулось в вашем сердце, не держите его при себе. Поделитесь этим видео с тем, кому оно может понадобиться, и оставьте комментарий. Расскажите, что вы думаете. Независимо от того, согласны вы или нет, или у вас есть вопросы, ваш голос важен, а ваша история может помочь другому почувствовать себя понятым.